Welcome back, everybody. This is Modern Randy. I am Randy, and today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different with the World Championship here coming up in just a few days when this video is being recorded. I'm kind of going to go over standard what's going on with the top decks, what we expect to see at Worlds, and what will hopefully, my kind of prediction of what I think might take first place overall. Obviously, if you like what I'm doing, you like what you're seeing, go ahead and leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, let me know what you guys think is going to take down Worlds. Always happy to hear your guys' input. And starting off with probably the boogeyman of the format, or one of the most played decks in the format, if nothing else, is Gruul Prowess. So Gruul Prowess is not anything new or surprising. This deck has kind of been around for a little bit of a hot minute. Kind of just going over the obvious fact of, like, you're playing your Heartfire hero, you're playing Monastery Swiftspear, you're playing the Emberheart Challenger, Manifold Mouse, which is a great little creature, being able to help trigger your Valorant here. It's awesome. Then you have Questing Druid, it's some card draw, and Slickshot Show Off because that card's really good. Don't really have to explain that one. But it's basically playing a bunch of pump spells with Monstrous Rage, Snakeskin Veil as a pump spell plus a protection spell, Force the Tower for removal, and then Turn Inside Out to as a pump spell plus, if our creature dies, now we have a way to get, some kind of value back out of it. And then Innkeeper's Talent is basically just a way to continuously pump your creatures while also triggering the Valiant mechanic, either on Heartfire Hero or Emberheart Challenger. So either you're getting additional cards, or you're just making this big Heartfire Hero that, eventually when it dies, it's just going to kill the opponent. And they have to block it, but they can't block it, but they can't kill it. And it's just this weird, awkward situation. This deck has been around for a hot minute. It has usually been playing the Red Leyline. I think the deck is better without the Red Leyline. I think that's a terrible card in the sense of it looks great when you go, turn opening hand, you put down double Leyline, you have your 1-drop spell, and you're just going to kill them on turn 2, right? Like, you look like you're a genius. This is the magical Christmas land of this, like, look, man, I killed you on turn 2. This card's great. I don't know why people are saying it's bad. It looks terrible, though, when you are playing it on anything other than turn 0. If you draw that card, you're just like, cool, this is a dead card. This is not going to do anything for me. So, kind of interesting. This is just a list that got first place in a standard challenge here on the 21st. So obviously there are, wax and wanes to these decks. The sideboard constantly changing depending on what you think your metagame is going to be. Obviously that's going to be the huge part about all these decks is what they think the metagame is going to be. We have the top players in the world basically coming together. So clearly, you're going to have, some of the best people. Not to mention you're going to have all these people who are going to be on teams. They're going to have the best of the best. Also testing with the best of the best. So it's going to be really interesting to see what people come with. Do I think Gruul Prowess is going to be a big deck at Worlds? I don't think it will. I think that because it has such a target on its head, it's such a big, well-known deck, I think a lot of people are going to be prepared to beat this deck, but I don't think a lot of people are going to be taking this deck just because it's so well known, it's so obvious, to take, quote unquote. I just don't see a lot of people picking up this deck or taking it to World. Now, I could be wrong. It could turn out that, like, this just has a great matchup against a lot of decks. And we've seen it have a good matchup against, like, some of the more, like, controlling decks. Obviously, if you're super fast, you're just going to go underneath them. They have to have that removal spell. You make them have to have it every turn. Turns into a bigger thing of where, if you can make them have to have it more often than not, they're not going to always have it. They can't always have it. It's just statistically impossible. That being said, though, I do think this is one of the biggest decks that everyone has on their mind when they are testing and doing things for Worlds. So whether or not this will be a huge deck we see, I'm not 100% sure. Like I said, I think it's not going to be that big of a deck, but I do think that it is going to be on everyone's mind and everyone's going to be testing against it and testing to make sure they have a game plan for it. Whether their game plan is playing, 18 1-drop removal spells, or going bigger than it, or getting a bunch of life, or I'm going to just hope to dodge it because I don't think people are going to bring it type thing. So it could be this weird, we could get this weird meta where enough people think that people aren't going to bring Gruul Prowess, so then like 3 people bring Gruul Prowess and just dominate because no one was prepared for it. I don't think that's going to happen, but we've seen those kind of like weird pseudo meta things happen before, so it wouldn't be too surprising, but I don't think that's how it's going to happen. Moving on, the next deck that's kind of like picked up some big popularity, or I don't want to say big popularity, but it has like really picked up steam again because it's kind of fallen off, is Golgari Midrange. So this deck is simply put just a mid-range deck looking to take control of the board, win the early game through having, cut down, Dreams of Steel and Oil, Duress, and then we also have Anointed with Affliction and Go for the Throat as our removal spells, and then we have Cossack Bronco as a way to get some card value. Mosswood Dread Knight, which is literally just a card value creature. Melissa, Sunslayer, is a huge card right now. I think this card is actually really good with its ability to destroy target enchantment. We have a bunch of enchantment decks running around. We have, the main deck is playing all the Overlords, which are enchantments when you impending them. You have the blue-white, blue-red, blue-white, red-white, mono-white, Caretaker's Talent decks that are running around. Great to, if you get to hit in with that destroyed Caretaker Talent, that's huge. There's just a bunch of like random enchantments running around, which is not usually what you see in standard. So it's kind of weird that, like destroying the enchantment is good. Like that's usually just like we have a sideboard card for destroy target artifact and destroy target enchantment, and we never use the destroy target enchantment abilities. What usually happens in standard. So it's kind of crazy. It's, enchantment matters. They're also playing, Sentinel of the Nameless City, Tranquil Flowback, being able to gain life, being able to exile people's graveyards. We have the Azorius Tempo deck running around, which is really good. And then we have, obviously destroying artifacts and enchantments, also very good. Just kind of like a whole little value deck. Nothing too crazy about this deck. It's not doing anything broken in general, but it is doing just enough things well enough, right? It's just a consistent deck. It has the removal spells to beat, the Cruel Prowess deck, and it has like the ability to keep kind of dropping problems and dropping threats to deal with the other mid-range decks. And it also has enough like enchantment removal in the main deck to be able to deal with what's going on with your enchantments, where they're pulling ahead type thing. So I do think that this is probably going to be one of the bigger decks played at the tournament. I think that people are going to come to the conclusion that being able to have a more well-rounded deck is usually better than having, the polar opposites where, like, you're super heavy in control because you think you're going to play against, or I guess not really heavy control, but like you're going to play domain because you're expecting more mid-range decks. So, but you have a terrible aggressive matchup where you're going to play like, red-green prowess, gruel prowess, whatever you want to call it, because you know that you're going to have, you think there's going to be more people on like domain style decks, and this kind of just fits in the middle. Now, obviously, this deck probably has a little bit of a harder time against domain as a whole. Obviously, you have the answers in your main deck. You have, Melissa Sunslayer, you have Tranquil Flowback, you have Duresses, you have, these things to kind of answer the problems. You have Archfiend of the Dross as a big, hey, I'm going to drop this on turn 4 and you need to answer this type card. So it's not crazy enough to see where like this deck couldn't do well against domain by any means. But I do think that is going to be one of the more popular decks. I think the Golgari mid-range is going to be more popular. I think things like Dimir mid-range will be more popular going into this tournament just because you have some of the best players playing. So if you have, the best minds playing, the best thing you can do in that situation is like have the most options available to you, right? You don't want to pigeonhole yourself into I'm an aggressive deck, so I'm gonna have to be attacking and pushing damage every turn type situation, or I'm domain and I decided to play this type thing. So just it's interesting. We'll see what happens there, but I do think this Golgari mid-range deck is probably one of the better decks to be taking to Worlds. Obviously, you have like I said, we have the best players around the world playing in Worlds, so I'm sure they're going to find something, they're going to break something, they're going to figure out something that is better to do than what is the top decks right now. Maybe they don't, maybe the top decks are just the top decks. I could obviously be wrong, I'm not 100% sure, but we'll see what kind of happens with this as a whole. Going through next is the Azorius Control. So there's this Azorius Control, and there's like this red-white control list running around. They're basically both the same decks. Essentially, they are mono white splashing either blue, or they're mono white splashing for red for Imodane's Recruiter in the sideboard. So this one is playing, they're all playing like, so Enduring Innocence is just a great card value creature. So, whenever one or more creatures you control with power 2 or less enters, you draw a card, and then when it dies, if it wasn't a creature, you get to return it to the battlefield as an enchantment. So, just kind of like a good, or if it was a creature, you could turn it as an enchantment. So this is a good value card. We have Lorraine, the third path. This is here because enchantment removal is just good in the main deck. We are in this, weird position where you want the enchantment removal. It's good. It's just, it's not a bad thing to have at this time. Of course, we're playing for Biza. The Bounding Spring card is amazing. If you're behind, it pulls you ahead. If you're like the worst this card is a 4 mana 4/5. That is like the bottom barrel, and usually if it's because if it's only a 4 mana 4/5, you're winning the game already. So like that's okay. Otherwise, it's pulling you ahead or it's pulling you back to parity with whatever your opponent's doing. You know, you're making tokens, you're gaining life, you're drawing cards, you're getting a treasure token, just a bunch of different things that you can be getting from this card. It's just a super value card. And it makes sense you're going to be playing it in, you know, your mono white control deck splashing colors, basically. Then of course we're playing 2 Elspeths as our just like token generator, making our creatures with flying, returning permanents, you know, just a great 4 mana value creature. And then we have 4 lay down arms, 4 get lost, and 4 parting guest as our spot removal. Parting guest is kind of an interesting one, so you get to exile a non-token creature, and then if the gift wasn't promised, it gets returned to its owner's. It gets returned to battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it, beginning at end step. And then obviously, if you give them a gift, which is a tapped fish, so a 1/1 fish, you just get to exile target creature or non-token creature, which is kind of huge. It's also really good too. So like I said, when we're behind, if we need to blink our Biza, it now becomes a 5/6 with also gains its life and all that fun jazz. Same thing with Lorien on the third path, being able to blink that. Just great little value right there. And then of course we're playing, you know, Caretaker or Carrot Cake. Probably the most weird artifact or fun artifact I've ever played. I was even considering playing this in Pioneer at one point in time for the RC. Just a great little 2-drop artifact that does so much work. And of course, you know, Sunfall, because it's the best removal spell or the best master removal spell we have, or best board wipe we have, essentially. And then the deck, or the card that combines this deck or just keeps it, is the glue to this deck, is the Caretaker's Talent. This card has been huge. It's been huge in Standard. It's been huge in Pioneer. I doubt it's ever going to see play in Modern, but this card has just been overall really good, and it doesn't seem like it'd be as broken as it is, and it's not broken per se. It's just a very good value card. But the reason they play blue essentially is for Jace to protect Perfected Mind, which is a good way just to be able to mill out your opponent, things like that. It can like help you win those really grindy games. And then we're also playing the gate in the sideboard as well. Those are really the blue splashes here. I'm not sure if the blue splash is better than the red splash as a whole. I think the red splash gives you a lot more explodability. So we'll see what comes out on top when it comes to these Caretaker Talents. Will it be a mono white build? Will it be an Azorius build? Will it be a Boros build? Will it be Orzhov build? I don't know. No one knows what's going to be the correct build. Maybe it turns out Caretaker Talents is a bad deck as a whole, and you shouldn't be playing this in Standard. Who knows? But I do think that this is going to be probably one of the more popular decks. I think that this Guardian Midrange is going to be another popular deck for sure. Just things that, you know, do well, give you a lot of options, lets you play from behind if you get behind, lets you capitalize on your position if you're ahead. So I do think this is going to be one of the decks to see, or one of the decks that's going to do well in the Worlds Tournament. Next deck here is Azorius Tempo. So we kind of saw this deck played in the last Standard season as well. It wasn't doing that well. This time it's doing a lot better. Mainly because of the Abhorrent Oculus. This card has been a house. It's been doing amazingly well in Modern. It's been doing super well in Legacy. Or I'm sorry, not Legacy. I've been doing super well in Modern. Seen some play in Legacy, I believe. But it is a really good card. It's a 5 mana. It's a 5/5 flying creature for 3 mana. Now, notably, you do have to exile 6 cards from your graveyard. So that does make it a little bit harder. And then beginning of each opponent's upkeep, you manifest Dredge. You get to look at the top 2 cards, put one of them face down as a 2/2, and then put the other one in the graveyard. So this card has been really big, though, because it's such a hard card to kill, right? It's a 5 mana, or it's a 5/5. I don't know why I keep wanting to call it 5 mana. It's 3 mana. It's 3 mana to cast. It's a 5 mana, oh my gosh, it's a 5/5. Flying 5/5. And so you're playing that with, you know, Haughty Djinn, which we saw last Standard season. And then we also have Pixlock Prankster as well to kind of fill up our graveyard. And then to get these back, though, in case they go to the graveyard, we have, you know, Helping Hand, and we have Recommission as our ways to kind of buy these back. So this is just, you know, a good way to get our creatures back for super cheap. Especially, you know, Helping Hand's the best one. So for 1 mana, we can buy back, a 3 cost creature That's kind of huge, just being able to cheat on mana so much. And then, we have Into the Flood Maw to bounce problematic creatures and permanents. We have counter spells with Phantom Interference and 3 steps ahead. Sleight of Hand to help smooth out our draws. Charter Course to draw more cards, discard our creatures, buy them back for cheap. Moment of Truth here to look at the top 3, put one of those cards into your hand, one in the graveyard, one in the bottom, kind of just helping get our creatures into the graveyard to rebuy. And then Soul Partition as a way to some removal, essentially. I think this deck is really well positioned. I think that this deck plays super well ahead and is not that great from behind. Obviously, like most tempo decks, you want to be playing ahead or at parity at least. This deck can get out of hand pretty easily. That being said, it does have a really hard time with graveyard hate, so I'm kind of curious to see what happens with that moving forward. I kind of think that in general, this deck should move away from Hadi Djinn and go with Horrent Oculus and Monstrous Mentor as its eight creatures, essentially, is what it should be playing. Because Monstrous Mentor just doesn't care about the fact that you exiled your graveyard, or I have no graveyard. I'm going to keep playing these like 1 mana cheap spells and just kill you easily with my Monstrous Mentor triggers and my little mentors. That being said, though, I am curious to see, what the best minds in Magic essentially think is the correct way to play this deck. If they think that they should be taking it all, if they just have it on their radar and have a game plan for it, or what's all going on with that. But I do think it's going to be really interesting seeing and breaking down what's going to be happening here with the championship, with the World's Championship. I'm curious to see, out of these decks, what people are going to be bringing, what they're going to be taking, and so forth. Then going on to one of the other aggro decks that kind of been around, been popping up. This is, of course, Jeskai Aggro, which for anybody who's unsure, Jeskai Aggro is basically just the Convoke deck, essentially. It's gotten a little bit more grindy-ish as a whole. It's not so much all in so fast. That being said, we got Clockwork Percussionist as a new card for it, for the deck. It's a hasty 1/1 artifact. When it dies, you get to exile a top card of your library. You can play that to the end of your next turn. So that's kind of a good little thing to go along with Gleeful Demolition. We're also playing, the Novice, Spyglass Siren, which is a new one. Well, not new one in standard so much as it's getting played in this deck now, which is new. It's different. Of course, Warden of the Inner Skies, Resolute Reinforcements, Emanane's Recruiter, the whole reason to be playing this deck, basically, along with Knight Errant of Eos. And then, 4 Gleeful Demolition. They're playing the Case. Sheltered by Ghost is another new one. There we go. Sheltered by Ghost is another new one that, lets you exile target, or exile problematic permanents, as well as, give you your lifelink to help against the other aggro decks type things. And then we're playing 2 Painted Studio / Deface Gallery. We're really playing it for the Deface Gallery, so when your creatures attack, you get a +1/+, they get +1/+0 until end of turn. Painter Studio is not too terrible later on in the game. If we're getting into later turns, we need to gas up a little bit, we can unlock that room to exile the top 2 cards of our library and play them till the end of turn. So it gives you a little bit of gas on the back end as well. The sideboard here is really why we're blue, is for Protect the Negotiators. 2 mana with a white kicker, so if this spell is kicked, you get to make a 1/1 white soldier. And then counter target spell unless the controller pays 1 for each creature you control. Obviously, we have a bunch of 1-drops, 2-drops essentially, so this card should always be, should theoretically always be like a mana leak type card where, your opponent has to pay 3 or more mana, so it just lets you play ahead, keep continually playing your spells, as well as just as well as being able to have counter spells to stop, the board wipe, stop your interaction from your opponent type thing. So you can kind of play into the board wipe knowing that you have a counter spell up, just ready and waiting to go. So again, I don't know how well this deck is going to show up or how big this deck is going to be at Worlds. These are some of the best decks right now, or the most played decks right now in the format of Standard. So just kind of going over what's going on with them and what's happening as a whole. I do think that this is probably one of the better aggro decks to play. I think that it plays well against spot removal, things like that, because you're making so many tokens, you're making so many creatures type thing. It's kind of what it did well in Pioneer and in Modern to a lesser extent, where like spot removals is not good against this deck. Like the spot removal is good if they're killing, the Knight Errant of Eos. Like that's great. That's really good if you're killing that, or you're killing Warden of the Inner Skies. Otherwise, you're trading your spells for these, mediocre creatures that aren't doing a lot of damage, but will end up just compiling enough damage over time. So I'm interested to see if this is what might be the aggro deck of choice, because you get to play a little bit of a longer game, you get to play a little bit more interactiveness with them. So be interesting to see what happens at Worlds, to see if this deck even shows up or not. Another one of the mid-range decks that's been doing well is this Dimir mid-range list here. Not too much has changed, I want to say, from when it was being played in last standard season. We're still playing our Spygrass as our 1-drop. We got Deep Cavern Bats, Interaction, same thing with Fairy Mastermind. Preacher, because he's still a good card, to the surprise of no one. Card's dumb. Toss a Tidebinder to interact. We have Enduring Curiosity, which is probably the newest addition to this. That's 4/3 with a flash, and then whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. And if it died, with a creature, you get to return it to the battlefield as an enchantment. So just super good there. We got Interaction as well, and then we're playing Cut Downs, Go for the Throw, Anointed Affliction. We got counter spells, and we're just we are this very much mid-range or mid-range / really tempo E deck, and we've kind of traded out Gix for the Enduring Curiosity, which I think is probably a little bit better as a whole, just it being so much more resilient to removal in that case, where oh, you killed it, that's cool, it's coming back as an enchantment now. I also like Toss's Timebinder in this deck. There's a lot of different quick triggers that are really good just to turn off or counter. I'll get to that here probably with the next deck. But I do think that this is probably one of the best decks to take. Arguably, I think that this has a lot of what you're looking for if you're trying to play against a wide variety field. That being said, I think this deck might be a little bit weaker to the Gruul Prowess deck, the Gruul aggro deck that's running around. I think this deck is probably a little bit weaker to it, even though you are playing Cut Down, Anointed Affliction, and Go for a Throw. I think that the fact that they have the ability to kind of come out swinging and just do so much damage so fast, that it's going to be a little bit hard for you to keep up as a whole. Now, obviously, I could be wrong. I haven't played a whole bunch of Standard. I've just kind of been dipping my toes into it because I have to get ready for the next RCQ season with it being Standard. But I do think that this is probably one of the best decks, and this is probably the deck that I would pick to take down the entire tournament. Moving as of right now, I would probably be on a Dimir mid-range type plan or a Caretaker's Talent plan. I just think both those decks are really well positioned. I think that they both do what you want to be doing, and they're very, very much so. You have a lot of interaction and a lot of ideas of what you want to do and what you can do, essentially, which is what makes this deck so good. That being said, obviously I don't know what the best players are thinking, what they're coming up with, what crazy brews they might be doing or delving into that no one's been thinking of. That being said, though, I think Dimir mid-range is probably where you want to be if you're looking to take down any kind of RCQs or anything moving forward into the future. It just gives you a lot of different options and a lot of different strategies to do. That going forward, we have Domain, one of the biggest decks that is still somehow around. It's probably my best way to say this. I thought for sure this deck was going to die once we lost the Triomes, but like everything, this deck for some reason refuses to die. Now, obviously, there is a bunch of builds of Domain out there as well. I just took one that got 9th place. It was the highest placing recently. So don't expect this to be the end-all be-all or the best Domain deck by any stretch of the imagination. This is just the one I found that had done the best most recently. That being said, I do think that Domain is not terribly positioned at all, but I don't think it's super good. I think Domain is what you want to take if you expect everyone to be on a mid-range deck. If you think that Worlds is going to be all mid-range, I would take Domain. I think that Domain's going to essentially eat the mid-range decks like it easily has been doing last standard season. So I think that's what's going to happen again. That being said, if people decide to play aggro or try to play more aggressive strategies, Domain definitely struggles against that. If Gruul Prowess ends up being, 20% of the meta, and you're on Domain, you're going to feel real stupid that you chose Domain. Domain does not have a horrendous matchup against it, but it doesn't have a good matchup either. Domain definitely can just get overrun really fast. You are a little bit slower If you look at this build specifically, it was playing a bunch more playing a bunch more planes to play down Leyline Arms, and it's playing 4 Get Lost along with 1 Parting Gift. Notably because it knows that its game plan against aggro is bad. That being said, this one is playing a little bit more towards like the Bant side of Domain, because we're playing Overlord Pits. We're playing Overlord of the Hutwoods. Pretty much every Domain deck's gonna be playing 3 to 4 of these. I think 4 is probably just the correct number. I'm kind of surprised this person was only playing 3. One Atraxa, we've seen some number of Atraxas in these lists. I've seen 1 to 4 basically at this point. I think it's all just depending on what the player wants to be doing. I'm not sure what the correct number is for sure. I think that probably more than 1 is correct. Probably 2 to 3 is where I would want to be on for Domain. That being said, though, there is a million different builds of Domain right now. So maybe there's a really good build of Domain that I don't know about that the pros are coming up with. And we'll see. We'll see what happens, right? I think Domain is one of those decks that's going to be either really powerful or really terrible, and there's no in between on this essentially. And they're playing, of course, 4 of the Overlord Mistmoors, the white one, probably one of the best ones to play in Domain. Buys you time with creatures, and then once you do get to hardcast it, it's just essentially a Grave Titan for anybody who remembers that card. But again, they're playing a bunch of removal, playing 2 Scroll Shifts, being able to exile those enchantments, essentially. But actually, really, this is for us, because you get to return to the battlefield under owner's control. So being able to blink our Overlords as their enchantments, they come back out as creatures, and they also get that ability again when they enter. Of course, we're playing through 3 up the Beanstalks, Temporary Lockdown, Leyline Binding, Cavern of Souls, and then... But... I do think that this deck is either going to be really good or really bad, and I think I'm leaning towards it's going to be bad. I think that as a whole, this deck is not well positioned against the aggro decks. I also think that a lot of the mid-range tempo decks are going to be able to overrun it because they're going to have a game plan for this deck. So I think it's going to be real dependent on how big or how well Domain does, or what the testing teams figure out with Domain. I think that people are high on Domain as a whole, but I think that it is not going to be nearly as well positioned as people think it is. I think they lost a lot when they lost the Triomes, and the fact that people are still playing this deck is a little surprising to me, because I think that trying to make Leyline Binding work is a lot more work than it used to be, and it's a lot harder to get it online, and I don't think it's worth the sacrifice, worth all the effort to really do it. I could be wrong, like I said, but these are some of the top decks right now in Standard as it sits. Obviously, we're just going to go... We're going to keep up with all the World's coverage. It starts on Friday. Friday around like 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So I'm really curious to see what's going on with that. I'm curious to see what's going to happen with it. I'm curious to see how the drafting goes. I can't wait to see how the Standard gameplay goes, especially with the RCQ season coming up and going into Standard. As always, guys, if you like what I'm doing, you like what you're seeing, go ahead and leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with everything that I'm doing. And let me know what you think is going to take down Worlds, or who you think is going to take down Worlds. And I'll catch you guys next time.